Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
On this pre-fall day, it's like a teaser because you know it's going to get hot again.
No, it's still summer.
It is.
I insist.
You insist, yeah.
Yeah, I think my summer.
Well, I guess we're expecting another heat wave
No.
this coming week.
Nothing compared to back east with their 90 degrees and
And the
100%
humidity. Yeah, let's count our blessings because that humidity. The mistake I made one year was traveling to New York, went to a concert in Tanglewood on July 4th. Oh my God. Miserable. It was, who was that? Mamas and, not the Mamas and Papas. It was an old group that was getting back together, and I can't remember who it was now. It'll come back to me in the middle of my dharma talk. Anyway, case 40, kicking over the water jug. Main case, when Master Isan was under Hyakujo, he had the position of Tenzo. Hyakujo wanted to choose a master for Mount Tai. He called the head monk and the rest of his disciples together to have them present their views and said that the outstanding person should be sent. Then he took a water jug, put it on the floor and said, "You may not call this a water jug. What will you call it?" The head monk said, "It cannot be called a wooden sandal." Hyakujo then asked Isan. Isan immediately kicked over the water jug and left. Hyakujo laughed and said, "First monk, you have been defeated by Isan." So he ordered Isan to found the new monastery. Momon's commentary. Isan summoned up all of his valor, but alas, he could not jump out of Hyakujo's trap. Upon examination, he favors the heavy and not the light. But why? Look, though he removed his headband, he put on an iron yoke. The verse. Tossing away the bamboo buckets and ladles, he makes a vigorous thrust and cuts off hindrances. Hyakujo's heavy barrier cannot interrupt his rush. Countless Buddhas come forth from his toes. So, this koan, I remember reviewing this and thinking, they had these types of politically expedient interviews back in the 9th century. So a lot of times leadership will decide who's going to get a position before they actually post the position.
We're talking about Kaiser now, or Yokoji?
At this point, I'm talking about this koan. So, but it happens at Kaiser. That was how I was directly relating to it. And then HR comes in and says, "Oh no, you got to do this fairly. You got to do this the right way if you want to avoid any liability, no discrimination, all that stuff."
Everybody winks and says, "Oh yeah."
Yeah. The leadership just agrees to go along with it, and then they make the same choice anyway. Well, I've had one case in my 40 years with Kaiser in which the person coming in to interview was so good that they changed their mind, that the person that they thought was they were going to get the position, and the person they thought was going to get the position didn't prepare, just came in and did a really bad interview. And so they gave it to the person who interviewed better. And because they were all equally qualified, and it was a matter of how did they present themselves in the interview. So one time in 40 years that they actually made that I know of, that I was involved with. Anyway, so this is a similar case. So the backstory, for those who didn't read the commentary, there was some. Well, it depends on which story you read. In one story, the person was a lay practitioner. The other story, he was a traveling monk. Either way, he had the supernatural powers and could make these predictions and decisions based on his supernatural powers. So he came to Hyakujo and said, I've seen a part of the mountain that will attract 1,500 new monks. You must build a monastery there. And Hyakujo says, and he was saying, you must send someone to build a monastery there. And Hyakujo says, well, what about me? And the person says, no, you're not good enough. Or you're not robust enough, because you required that, someone who's, robust. It's a big mountain, big place. If you send someone, you'll get 1,500 monks. If you go, you only get 1,000. So deficit of 500 monks. So at that point, the head monk walks in, and Hyakujo says, well, what about this guy? And the guy says, he turns to the monk and says, cough. So the guy coughs. Walk around for a bit. So the guy walks around for a bit. And he says, oh, hopeless. Sends him out of the room. Then Isan walks in, and the guy takes one look at Isan without any words. That's the guy. Said him. So Hyakujo meets with Isan and says, you're going to go found this new monastery. Isan was the Tenzo at the time. Tenzo, in most monasteries, is the second highest position, because you've got to know, it's not just, technically it means they're the cook, but in order to be a cook in a monastery, you have to know what's happening at any given point all around the monastery and be able to feed these people adequately enough on very little money and very few resources. So it takes a talented cook to be a Tenzo at a monastery. So this guy was no schlub. I mean, he knew what he was doing, and very advanced in practice, and had been practicing for a long time. So Isan knew that he had this position. Then word got out that he'd been selected for the position, and of course, all kinds of backlash and protests, and the first monk was like, that's not fair. I'm being discriminated against by someone in the kitchen. It's like, okay, wow. Where was your practice at that point? So Hyakujo takes a step back and says, okay, fine. We'll give all of you a koan, and you all have to pass the koan. So then you have what happens in the koan after the fact. So one wonders about Isan's response. Not that it isn't effective, because it is, but is it effective because he already knows he has the job? So he's like, I'm not playing this game. Screw this water jug and any koan that goes along with it. I'm out, since you've given me the job already. And the first monk, didn't know that. He gave a kind of a standard. It's not a bad answer. It's still a little intellectual. Still a little dualistic. It's you may not call it a water jug. It's like, okay, there's still this and not that, and there's some duality going on in there. But still, it's not bad. Hyakujo's answer was definitely very zen, very on the point, very direct experience answer. Good answer. But one wonders, was his answer truly from his direct experience of the koan, or he's just done, not playing this game? Either way, it works. This is the type of personality you want, running a monastery, who's going to get past the games, get past the red tape, get past the usual bureaucratic BS that goes into running a monastery. Because monasteries in these days had to be sponsored by the imperial edict. So that was not an easy thing to do. You had to get along with the emperor. And emperors, depending on which era you were in, didn't always like Buddhists. So several of them, waged war against the monasteries. In this age, this is the Tang Dynasty. This is the golden age of Zen. So the emperors that were in power at the time did like the Buddhists, and gave them a lot of money, and they were well funded, well taken care of, and probably one of the only forms of education that a lot of people had at that time. Women weren't educated, and there weren't a lot of schools, especially in rural areas where a lot of these monasteries were. So if you wanted to learn to read and write, you became a monk. And according to Google Gemini, that unimpeachable source of information, the literacy rate at this time in China was about 10%, except in monasteries it was about 50%. So if you believe what I didn't ask Grok or Chat GPT, so I have no comparative answers between the LMMs. So here you have it. You've got two talented practitioners, because the head monk, and we don't know who he was. We don't have a name. He's kind of lost to history, but obviously he's head monk of this rather large monastery, because Yakuja's monastery was fairly sizable, probably 1,000 plus monks. And to be head monk of something that size, you had to be, on your game and well respected. Because basically the head monk would often sit in place of the abbot, the teacher, and if the abbot was ever absent or sick, the head monk would make sure that whatever services and schedules they were being kept. So he had a very tough job. And monks were all over the place. They were just typical human beings that were probably, some of them cared about the spiritual practice, some of them did not. They were there because they had to be. Same thing happens in Japan. A lot of the monks that go to the main monasteries are there because their family makes them go. They have family temples that they are expected to take over when their parents, their father usually dies. And so they have to go to Eiji or Sojiji or one of the other smaller monasteries to finish their training so they can take over the family temple. And I've met a couple of these monks who could care less about practice, and they were there only because the familiar duty that they had to perform. Isan did go on to become a great teacher. He did not build a monastery right away. He built a hut, sat out there for 8 years by himself, and which is something, once you have Dharma transmission, that was kind of traditional. You've now done all your formal practice, then you go out to see how this applies in your life. So you go out and do some solitary practice for a while. And some monks would return back to the city or to smaller monasteries. And Isan, after sitting for 8 years, gave up because no one was coming, but he didn't advertise because there wasn't a way to advertise in those days. And because he wasn't known by the emperor, he had no imperial money to build this monastery. So he tried to leave, and according to the story, he was detained by a tiger, which I think is an interesting way to describe what a tiger would do. So the tiger apparently tugged on his sleeve. So I think that because the sleeves that monks wear, they're huge. It was probably the first thing the tiger could bite into, without killing him, was the sleeve. And so Esau decided, well, perhaps this tiger is telling me I shouldn't leave. So he stayed. And monks showed up. Eventually, he builds a monastery. The monastery is called Isan, the mountain becomes named after him. And he is the founder of the Ikkyo school, which has since died out, but it was a huge Renzai sect school in China for several generations after that. So he did become, that monastery was built, 1,500 plus monks were at that monastery. So all that happened. But the important thing about this koan is, how does it manifest in your life? How do you put yourself in this situation? And for me, it was kind of interesting for me to put myself in this situation, because I've been on the receiving end of being told I have a job and then having to go through the interview. So I've been in that is kind of an interesting experience, because you're like, why bother? why do anything at all? Why not do what the other person did who's not here? I'm just going to go in and say what I'm going to say. But my choice at the time was to go in and present the best I possibly could, because there were other people that were going on the panel who had not made that decision. And so the interview was like, well, I have to work with everybody, not just with the person who likes me. So how do I now present myself in that situation? And it was to go in and present myself as being prepared and qualified for the position. And this is how I would how I would work with you and be part of the team, and whatever it was. In in my case, I consider that to be me kicking the water jug, being effective as I possibly can in that situation, and not just phoning it in, and being present at that particular time. The first monk's response is a little bit phoned in, cliche. Not that it's wrong, and not that that isn't one way of answering the koan, just not as direct, not as clean as getting rid of the situation altogether. It's like, in emptiness, you can call this thing anything you want, or nothing at all. And here's my choice. I'm busy. I'm kicking the can out of the way, and I'm going back to my kitchen. So the verse is really quite apt. Tossing away the bamboo buckets and ladles, that's his kitchen tools. He makes a vigorous thrust and cuts off the hindrances. Nothing's getting in his way. He's like, I'm not going to be bothered with your stupid koan. Yakujo's heavy barrier cannot interrupt his rush. The heavy barrier being the offer of this job. I mean, this is huge. He's going from this job in the kitchen to running a ginormous monastery, and dealing, with all of the exigencies and proclivities and politics of what that takes. Countless Buddhists come forth from his toes. So that kick did produce a lineage of monks that had profound effect on Zen practice. So truly, that this verse does express what happened. Where is the I like this. Though he removed his headband, which is the headband that cooks wear, that was that comes from way back. So this is 8th century, and put on the iron yoke. So huge. Well, do people know what yokes are? Yokes are the yoke. They were made of wood. Usually, when they tie oxen together, there's a piece of wood that they put their heads through. That's a yoke. When would they use an iron yoke? That seems extreme. I didn't Google that. So, but anyway, putting on an iron yoke, even more extreme than the wood yoke that would hold oxen together to that you did with the subburden to do work for you to get stuff done. Because that's really what running a monastery is. It is a lot of work, and I'm just beginning to get exposed to a little bit of the work that goes into running a monastery as I'm getting more and more involved at Yokoji, because I've had the privilege of being this interloper that showed up on the weekends and just did practice. But now being in that office and doing the office work and finding out how much work there is and how nuanced that work is really, it's been very eye-opening for me to experience. So here it is. How do you kick the water jug? Why would you kick the water jug? Or would you defer to the first monk's answer and be satisfied? Because the first answer is not wrong. It's okay.
I've noticed in a lot of koans that the head monk doesn't get no respect. he's always the butt of jokes or examples of how not to do it. I don't know, have you noticed that?
Yeah, that's true. Now, I haven't counted how many times that's happened, but there are some pretty profound. Obviously the sixth patriarch, who was considered this barbarian because he was from Vietnam, gave a better answer, and then than the head monk, and the head monk got passed over for getting dharma transmission, and of course sent the general out to get the robe and the bowl back as a result. So yeah, the head monk got the shaft in that koan. And I'm sure there were a couple of others, but you're right. They seem to, I don't know, because there's in Soto Zen practice, there's not, I guess, there's not a permanent head monk. There's a head trainee for every training period. And it's kind of a rite of passage to serve in that position. So I did my head trainee, and in Thailand you do this. You actually ordain for 90 days, and you're not considered to be a man. It's a male thing in Thailand unless you've spent 90 days in the monastery. And so you ordain for 90 days, and then you disrobe after 90 days because you've done your tour of duty, if you will, through the monastery. We don't have the ordination process, but we do have an entering ceremony for those who want to be head trainee for the 90-day training period. So you don't have to be a monk; you can be a lay practitioner and do that. I did it back then. We were doing winter-summer training periods. Now we do fall and spring. So I did winter of 2004 through 2005, and trying to wrangle the monks. It's like herding cats. There was this one very young monk because it was my job to make sure everyone was in the zendo when they were supposed to be in the zendo. And during training period back then, we started earlier. We started at 4:30 in the morning, and so I was always the last to go in to see who wasn't there. And so if they weren't there, I had to go get them. And this guy was never on time. And it's snowing outside. And I am from LA. So this snow was definitely better than summer, which was, hot. But I had to put my boots back on, go trudge up because he lived in the farthest possible cabin up on the hill. And I'd go, "Oh, I am coming, I'm up, I'm getting here." I was always waking him up. And I'd be like, "Really, dude, every day." and then I would start making a point of it. I knew he was going to be late, so I'd go early. I'd go get up, get there on time. That didn't work either. He'd go back to sleep. He was my nemesis.
It's snowing outside.
What?
Yeah. Of course it's late, it's snowing outside.
Yeah.
Totally justified.
I get it. If I wasn't trying to be this, head monk. But yeah, so he's a wonderful musician, jazz musician, living in Paris. He has a wife and two beautiful children now. So he grew up and made, it was Alex. I was trying to remember his name. I still don't remember his Dharma name, but he was a priest back then. Anyway, yeah.
So I read this going in two ways. It reminded me of Nancy Kills the Cat, because Joshu in that Cohen responds by putting his shoes on his head and walking out.
Yeah.
That's the action he takes. And Nancy responds, if Joshu had been there, I probably would have spared the cat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that idea of taking immediate action in response to what's happening. And in some sense, it doesn't matter, what the action is. Kicking the can over would be one thing. Mm-hmm. Putting your shoes on your head would be another thing. It's the fact that that was your immediate reaction. You took it. You went. You did it.
Yeah.
And so that's, one lesson for me, my experience of this cone is just, do what has to be done at that moment. May not be perfect, which is hard for a lawyer to come to grips with.
Yeah. Just don't use ChatGPT to write your briefs.
So that's one thing. It's just like, the other thing was I saw it as, without knowing the backstory you just told, or some of the backstory, that Isan just said, forget this, I'm out of here. And sometimes that's the right response too. It's like, this is too dumb for me to even participate in. I'm just gonna get the can and get out.
Yeah.
So those are the two kind of things I took away from it was, sometimes trust your immediate response, go with it. Maybe right, maybe wrong. It's your immediate response. Don't overthink it. Don't think about it at all. Or, when you're put in a ridiculous situation and you know it's ridiculous, just kick the can and get the hell out.
Yeah. The other thought I had was, maybe he's trying to get fired. If I kick this can, I won't have to run this monastery. But yeah, I think that's right. I think that's yeah, and that is really how it applies in everyday life. Do what you need to do. Take, if you have the time to take consideration, be slow about it. Great. If you don't, do your best. Just take the immediate action. Do what needs to be done, and just take care of it. And it doesn't matter about all these, looking good or being right or being wrong, because that's really where the first monk gets caught up in this case, but also in the other case I mentioned is the monk from who was going to be the sixth ancestor was very reticent about putting his answer up because he wanted to be right. So he mulled it over, checked his answers with his fellow monks, and he rewrote it. If he'd had Grammarly, it would have, saved him a lot of time. And even then, he tried to write it anonymously because he was afraid of criticism, of ridicule. And are we all not somewhat afraid of it? We want to be right. We want to look good. We want to make sure that people see the best of us. I don't think it's necessarily nefarious in any way, but we want to present the best we possibly can, and so we worry about these things, and we think about them over and over and over again. We write our answers, we write our responses, and which is what the first monk did. Whereas the poor guy who is also in the kitchen cleaning rice and not considered worthy of being anything at all because he's a barbarian from Vietnam, he was illiterate, so he couldn't even read what the first monk wrote because he wrote it on a wall, didn't sign it, had it read to him, and he immediately had a different response and had that person write it for him right next to the wall. The abbot who walked by the wall saw the second answer and immediately knew it was the better answer, but also knew the political ramifications of what would happen if he gave that person dharma transmission and erased the answer. Called, why am I blanking on his name now? He's the most famous successor. It'll come to me. Queen Ang, thank you. Called Queen Ang in secret, gave him the transmission, gave him the robe, and said, I will help you escape. So he takes him, he rows the boat across the river and says, go, run, just go. And he goes back and then doesn't show up for the Dharma talk. So sorry, Dharma's gone. So here we have slightly different situation. The first monk is feeling discriminated against as a very common claim when someone doesn't get a job that they think that they deserve. So not much difference between the 8th century and the 21st century in corporate America. Um, yeah, and yeah, and and it's interesting that the resolution is almost the same that we would do today as well. So these koans are not. We think about these are old stories or old guys or old these stupid koans don't make any sense. They're most of them are directly applicable to how we're living today. Some of them are confusing, I admit, but if you put yourself into these koans, you can, with your 21st century brain and body and experience, really experience this koan in its real form, through today's filters. Um, Same problem, same answers, and it was really a similar situation in which it was while I was doing my 90 day stint as head monk at Yokoji that I realized my differentiation between Zen practice and work, working at Kaiser, that separation completely fell away because there was one day I went to a staff meeting at Kaiser. Issues were discussed and then and somewhat resolved. The very next day, I attended the staff meeting at Yokoji. Same issues were discussed, same resolutions. I was like, oh my God, Kaiser is a great big Zen center. I get to practice wherever I am. It was, because we truly aren't separate. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work and to really come to that realization and also apply that realization and apply the realizations of these koans in everyday life. But they can be. That's the purpose of them. They don't stand out. They don't stand out as being something separate or special from the rest of your life. They are directly applicable to your life, which is why we study them. There's no other reason to do them. And I've said this many times. If indeed this practice did not have a practical daily application, I would not do it. It serves no other purpose. Zoomers, Kurt, Steve, anything?
I actually have thought.
Hang on one second. Steve, don't go away. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was just thinking it sounds like that it's with the koan too, it's like this idea that it's the attachment to the outcome that draws you out of the direct experience. Would you agree with that? And that's where the practice is trying to get you to notice that.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Focus on the outcome. Focus on being right, looking good, all those things. Take you out and separate you from the direct experience of what needs to be taken care of what's going on in the moment. And that happens all the time. That's the way we are. Not that is bad, because we want to present well. We want to be our best at any given time. So I don't look at that as a negative. However, there will be times in your life, in your everyday life, when you don't have time to look good, or circumstances happening in your life. I think of working moms, 3 kids. They've got to chauffeur them to 3 very distant locations for their various activities and be at work on time. And sometimes they show up at work and they look like they're a little stressed because they were busy taking care of the kids, taking care of their life. And the same thing, not that it has to be moms, but things happen and we get caught up in looking good. We get caught up in trying to be, present in a particular way. We have and I very oftentimes I would get people coming into my office, in my Kaiser days, kind of, this is not me. I'm not like this. I'm going, Well, yeah, you are like this. This is it's not that it's not you. It's that it's not the you what you want to present to the world. Um, but we're not limited to who it is we think we are. And if we can embrace and take care of and use effectively who we are at any given time, at any given moment, that takes care of it. It gets it done. And yeah, we worry about what we look like. And I'm sure that's, the head monk had been head monk for however long. We don't know who this guy was or how long he'd been in this position, but he probably enjoyed. There were some privileges, I'm sure, with this position, and he wanted to maintain that. So he's going to give an answer that makes him look good. Um, and I don't know how far in advance. So normally, the Renzai school tends to be, very spontaneous. So there's not going to be a lot of warning. You don't get a week to prepare. So the once the because it was the head monk who it's his fault. He cried foul and said, I should have this job. So Yakujo immediately says, okay, then both of you have to pass the same koan. That probably took place the same day. It was probably fairly fast, just from what I'm imagining. I'm making that up because there's nothing in this information that tells me that. So he's got this head monk had, a very, very few minutes to try and look like he would be capable of running a huge monastery, a monastery that didn't exist. So build a monastery. This was an indication, a clear indication of where he was in his practice, because he could only respond with where he was in his practice at that particular moment. So this is who he was. This is how he was, how he presented. So these were true indications. Isan, same thing. Now Isan's experience, comes in key because in the kitchen, this has happened. This in the 21st century, the kitchen at the Koji gets very rushed just before meals are supposed to be served because everything's being done, everything's fresh, everything is being cooked, and it's timed so that it's ready at a particular, because all the meals are served on time. Hopefully, that's the goal. Is so there is that rush. So I have to imagine back then they grew their own food. So the Tenzo was in charge of making sure that food was either he picked it himself or he had someone else pick it. And all that preparation is being done. And he's a senior practitioner and he's got to get this food done on time. And now he's being considered for this huge job that he already knows he has. So this is what's coming into the room to kick that water jet. He is being completely transparent with where he is and who he is, his true self at that particular point. Could we say the head monk was a little disadvantaged? You could say that. Would he win a lawsuit? I don't know. He's an at-will employee.
Yeah.
So.
You're not an employee at all.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, all that consideration oftentimes is what stops us from being truly authentic, being truly real, being truly in the moment. Is I've got to look good. I've got to be what this person expects me to be, or who I think what they are thinking of me. Takujo was not concerned. I mean, Isan was not at all concerned. It was like, screw this. I'm out. Here's your water jet. Yes.
With all due respect to, the Zen history and hierarchy and all of that. I think what bugs me about carrying this koan in particular is how the koan was presented. I always feel like there's this inside group that have a secret handshake. And you can't answer this koan, and, you're not worthy, you don't have the inside goods, you haven't been given transmission. And I really think that the phrase that you said, get past the gatekeepers, get past the BS, applies to that as well. I mean, to me, it just sounds like politics as usual, and you can couch it any way you want to. It's just one group telling the other group, we got the good, and guess what? You don't.
Yeah. That's one way of looking at it. I agree. I can't argue with that. And transmission is an inside job, but inside yourself.
If you're transmitting to yourself.
Yes. Yeah. So we have the cliche is mind to mind transmission, but there's nothing that you get from somebody else. If you haven't put in the work, if you haven't done the work, there's no other word for it, to really experience your true self, then you won't get it. And it becomes apparent in how you behave every day. So in the spontaneous moment, that's when your true self shows up, or where you are in that spectrum of enlightenment shows up. So Head Monk obviously had some level of enlightenment, because his answer was not at all bad. It just wasn't as direct as Shakujo's, and as Isan's. So yes, Isan knew ahead of time that he had this job, but if the Head Monk had come in and kicked the water jug, and Isan had come in with some cliche, would we have a different answer to this? I don't know, because obviously the magic guy, whatever his name was, the monk had already predicted that Isan would be the one, and Hyakujo believed this guy for whatever reason. And the whole test was set up after the fact. So politics as usual, yes, definitely.
But you're saying there's more than meets the eye, obviously.
Yeah.
The other thing I wondered about is the jug.
Yeah.
This is like, my husband was a chef for many, many years, and the way he runs our kitchen is very, almost fascist in a way. But you don't go messing with certain things, and you don't spill anything. So like kicking the jug is, the only worst thing would be kicking the jug and breaking the jug.
Yeah.
That would be, because then it's inoperable after that. But I thought it was really interesting that the cook does what you don't want any of your.
Yeah.
He does.
That is telling. I think that is
very insulting to a chef,
It is. Well, and also, this monastery is in the mountains. They don't have running water. They have to go get that water and carry it.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that the jug didn't get broken, because that would have been even more egregious.
Yeah.
Because, you're going to find your jug.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I missed your.
I guess it was kind of in line with the first thing that you mentioned. Like, I found it interesting. Like, it seems like the decision has already been made. The whole koan could just be a farce. Because if the decision has already been made, it doesn't really matter. Like, the arbiter of the final say, if he's already chosen the cook to be the leader of the new monastery,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. He could say whatever response.
You could. Well, let's leave the outcome out of the koan and just look at the koan itself. So the answer to the question itself directly, without whether or not he was going to get a job out of it, because this would not be a job that anybody in their right mind would want, because it's a very difficult job, very political. And most were raiding each other. So they were, not only did they have to deal with trying to stay alive, they had to deal with warfare, literal, because monasteries would raid each other and take the other monks as slaves. This is not a good time. This is not something. This is not a job I would want. So leave the job out of it and just how does he present? How do these two present in response to Hyakujo, to the situation? So, which is really what life is all about. How do you take care of whatever situation is coming up in front of you, right here, right now? No matter whether you're getting a new job or not, what do you do? It's, I can't even think of trying to think of a similar situation in 21st century terms, but I can't right now. But do you come up with some fancy, well-worded response, or do you just say the hell with it and kick it out of the way and go take care of what you're going to take care of? And it would depend on what the situation is. This one answer is not a rubber stamp for all answers.
I mean, just for an example of the situation, right? As you mentioned, that situation. I have also been in a situation where it's like you have the job, and now you're in an interview,
Yeah.
right? And now you have to choose whether to say, as you said, present the best version of yourself because I have to work with all of these people, as opposed to just their boss who happens to like them.
Yeah.
Right? And I guess when it comes down to choosing your authentic response could just as well be, well, I have to work with all these people, so I have to convince all of them as well, which is a well-ordered constructive response.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that raises the issue about as in typically there's this inherent contradiction between the need sometimes to stop and try to figure it out. What's the best thing for me to do in this situation? Or skip all that and just kick the can over and walk out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we often get confronted with these choices, and sometimes the correct answer is stop and think about how is this going to really impact people around me? Is this really the best way to fulfill my vows? What is, I mean, planning sometimes gets a sort of a dirty look in the Zen practice in my experience because it's too much thinking and what have you, but taking care requires thought and planning. So there you go.
Yeah.
Two sides of it.
Yeah, and there's some questions. I mean, I told you what my answer was with intention, so do you want to take over?
Yeah.
I did not answer that question.
Right.
And I'm still not answering that question.
But you haven't said no yet either.
True.
That's the other side of that.
Yes, just by listening to you and listening to the program, what came to my mind, there was no focus on presence in that particular moment, but mine was took over. In all these scenarios, and one with single focus is what is the purpose of it? And then I would say, when I was in those sort of environment, I would ask myself, you want to be in this environment? Imagine, the routine, daily work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they think she's out of their mind or he's out of mind, but I think it's, you don't want to be part of that how struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are struggling to take the rope, pull back and forth.
But is there a way out?
It's not easy. Go back to the kitchen.
You're right. Well,
Wash the rice,
watch the right. Well, I mean, does that take you out of the power struggle though?
you know?
Yeah.
All of those, that brings you to that point of moment. And it's interesting that, he kind of didn't escape the state anyway. It didn't matter what he kicked or what he said.
Yep.
And how many years he spent in isolation, it all came to fruition.
It did. And he, like the verse said, took off the headband and put on the iron yoke. So he made that choice. That was his response in to the situation. The situation was we had an opportunity to build a new monastery. Even before the koan, he'd been ordered to start this monastery. Because that's how things were done. I mean, he probably could have, he could have walked away, but where would he go? There are not a lot of jobs to choose from. And, even though he may not, I don't know why anybody in their right mind would want that job, but that's my bias. He was already going to take that on. So the koan, didn't matter. But he still was he responded from the place of his true self, as did the head monk. They both responded from the place of their true self. Their true selves were in different places. If I were to make it, building a monastery would require someone who had the ability to make an instant decision and make it happen immediately. Yeah, I'd take Isan because he took decisive action, and that's what would be required to build a monastery. The other guy, I'd bring him on as a PR. He'd have a job, but he'd have a different job that was more befitting of his skill set.
Or HR.
Yeah, will I ever get rid of HR? It's 40 years is just too long. Anyway, any final thoughts before we close?
As a PR person, I take umbrage with that.
As you should. All right.